There are so many ways we learn to leave parts of ourselves at the door. We learn to make ourselves smaller, to fit the expectations of our families, our cultures, our communities. We learn which parts of ourselves are welcome and which parts might make us too much, too different, too complicated. And sometimes the work of coming home to ourselves begins when we finally realize that we don't have to choose between belonging and being fully who we are. Today's guest, Aditi Loveridge, has spent much of her life exploring that tension, both personally and through the community she has built. Aditi is a queer brown woman who was born in India and raised in conservative Alberta. She's a mother, entrepreneur, and longtime nonprofit leader who has spent more than 15 years creating spaces of care and connection for people whose stories haven't always fit neatly into the spaces around them. Throughout her work, a thread kept emerging: the profound human need to be seen, to be affirmed, and to know that there is a place for your whole story. But while Aditi was creating spaces where others could belong, she was still learning how to make that space for herself. In this conversation, we talk about cultural identity, queerness, motherhood, authenticity, chosen family, and the communities that help us become more fully ourselves. We talk about what happens when we stop living according to expectations and begin listening to those quiet inner whispers telling us that there might be another way. Hey everyone, I'm Yamuna. Welcome to the first season of The Long Road Home, a podcast where travelers, storytellers, and culture makers I've met along my global journeys share the stories behind their paths, their roots, the roads they've traveled, and how those journeys have helped them find their way home in the world and within themselves. I'm so glad to have you here with me. Let's go. Aditi Loveridge is a charity founder, nonprofit leader, and advocate whose work has been shaped by a deep commitment to care, equity, and creating more inclusive communities. With more than 15 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, Aditi has led initiatives addressing systemic barriers, access to care, and community-based support. She is the founder and former CEO of the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center, which she grew from a grassroots initiative into a nationally recognized organization supporting families through pregnancy and infant loss. Aditi is also a queer brown woman who grew up in conservative Alberta, became a mother, and later came to embrace her queer identity. Today, she is engaged to a woman and brings the perspective of her own journey towards authenticity and belonging into both her personal life and her leadership. She's a people-centered leader, advocate, and mother whose work is rooted in the belief that everyone deserves to be seen, supported, and given the space to become fully themselves. I am delighted to welcome you to the show, Aditi.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So you and I met a while back, and we I think it's probably getting to like 15 years, if not longer. We were both at a weekend doula training through DONA, the Doulas of North America, and you have gone on to do, some incredible things in the years since. But aside from that work, which we will get into a little bit later in the conversation, I just started following you on Substack, and I saw this quote that popped up in your latest article that was like the sort of the thing that grabbed my attention. And I'm going to read this quote from your current letter. So, quote, "Belonging is co-created. It always has been. We build it in the small moments, with the people we choose, in the spaces we decide are worth claiming as ours. I'm learning that belonging isn't a place I stumble into. It's a practice, a daily choosing of who and what gets to take up room in my life," end quote. I really love that. And I would love if you could tell me a little bit more about what that belonging, that co-creation of belonging means to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for reading that back. It's always interesting when I can hear, what I've written from somebody else. So thank you for that. Yeah, I Growing up in Calgary, I never really felt like I fully fit in. I was often too brown in some spaces and then not brown enough in other spaces. I felt like I wasn't straight enough for many spaces, and then in some places I was too queer. And so I felt like through my life I continued to like shrink and leave parts of myself kind of at the door. And now, years later and having this experience, I thought that belonging was a place that you find, and then finally you arrive in the space that's kind of embraces your wholeness and your humanity and all of the pieces of you. And I've searched for that for so long. And in searching for that, I think that, I like shrunk myself. I've had a lot of heartbreak. I've had a lot of actually even living in ways that were really inauthentic to me. I put on many masks, to try and fit in. And what I've really realized is, there is no one space. And we actually get to, like you said in the quote, like co-create our space. We get to choose the people. We get to choose the environments. We get to choose the jobs. We get to choose the places, the people. We get to create that. And when I started to shifting from that, like, oh, this is a place that we stumble into and we find, and more from that, like, I get to create, that's when things really shifted for me.
I love that. That's so beautiful. The belonging as a co-creation, and yeah, and not as like a place or something that you arrive to, but really like an every moment sort of decision that you make with every space that you enter, and the relationships that you form. And like you and I grew up in Calgary, it sounds like, and I think we're very contemporary in age as well. And you are definitely more visibly brown than I am. I feel like I have more like the Indian woman living in my soul, but visibly I'm not. I don't think a lot of people would place me there, but I can certainly understand, the nuances of growing up with that kind of culture. Did you grow up in a home where you had like a lot of Indian culture as part of your world, or were you guys more Canadian? For, I guess, lack of a better way of
Yeah.
describing it, what is Canadian, but the
Yeah,
classic, I
totally.
guess, settler culture, if you will.
Totally. Yeah. I was born in India, and then moved here as a baby. So my family immigrated when I was a baby, to Calgary. And growing up, yeah, very, very Indian. So, mom cooked Indian food every day. So very culturally Indian. We're not like religious, but we do partake in a lot of like cultural, like Diwali and those kind of, like we're Hindu by kind of definition, but we don't practice the religion. However, we are very Indian. Like my grandparents at the time growing up, they were still alive and they also lived here. So they would
Wow.
have like, yeah, so they had pujas and we would go, and it was a very culturally Indian childhood, in the walls of my home. And I say that
Yeah.
because once I left my home, I would do everything I could to leave that culture at the door. Because growing up here, and this was, I'm 46, so this is going back a ways. And so at that time, there was not a lot of diversity. I lived also in the south end of Calgary, which wasn't very diverse at the time. And so I was like the only maybe one of two kind of brown kids at my school. And so there was a lot of shame in the culture. I was always constantly afraid. Like I remember going out, even like in my clubbing days. So I was older. Me and my sister would be like, Mom, you can't cook Indian food before we leave the house because we're going to smell like curry. And like, like it was
Mm.
just this like shameful thing. And so once I left the house, I really tried to fit into the Canadian ways of being, even though I had this rich, beautiful culture that surrounded me, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. I feel like I still hear that messaging even around the food smells. Like I'm staying with my mom now, and I'll be going out and she'll be like, you need to change. Like I just cooked, or I'm cooking, close all
Mm-hmm.
the doors and everything is going to smell bad. And yeah, I totally get that. And yeah, it's still very prevalent nowadays, but I didn't know that you were born in India. And can I ask specifically where you were born in India?
Yeah, yeah. So my sister and I were born in New Delhi. My mom and my mom's side of the family were all born, raised in Zimbabwe, Africa. And
Okay.
then my dad was actually born, raised in Burma, or what is now Myanmar. And so they both, my dad fled as a refugee to India. My mom went from Africa to India for school, and that's where they met. And then they had us, and then we moved to Canada.
Whoa, that is a very intercultural and very mixed background that you have for sure. So you're first
Hmm.
generation Canadian like myself. And like growing up from an Indian family, I mean, what were some of the messages that you received about, being a girl or a good daughter? Or was that sort of prevalent in your growing up as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes and no. So I would say my dad is one of the biggest influences in my life. He's like a very grounded, very non-judgmental, accepting human. Like I always say, if there was like a living form of like Buddha, it would be my dad. Um,
Oh,
yeah, like he's just been such an amazing human. Same with my mom, like very open-minded people. So they didn't outrightly say things. However, growing up as a daughter, you observe things. And so I got the opportunity of observing my own mother, being a daughter to my grandparents, and how she showed up for them as they continued to age. And this belief of being a good daughter, good Indian daughter, what that looks like. And so I grew up in a culture that's very, very beautiful, very rich, and also very heteronormative. At least that's my experience of it.
hmm.
Very, you know, other Indian families, but there wasn't a lot of interracial dating until my uncle ended up marrying a Canadian woman. And that I was like 10, I think, when she came into my life. And that was like mind blowing for me. But so I had this idea that a good Indian daughter was one that follows the path, that it lives within the binaries of what I saw, kind of fits into the boxes, doesn't ruffle feathers, um, looks a certain way, lives a certain way. Not
Yeah.
because my parents told me that, but it's what I observed. There wasn't a lot of influences otherwise in my childhood growing up.
Got it. That makes perfect sense. Like, would you say, looking back, that you were living someone else's story for you, or were you living your own story, or at what point do you feel like there was a change between those two things?
Yeah, so I always was the kind of the boundary kind of pusher. So I'm the younger of the two sisters. And so my sister, I think, probably grew up more in that living for everybody else. She went to medical school. I went to hairstyling school and makeup school. So I kind of always went on my own path, and I was supported in that from my family. Um, and I always, though, felt like shame around it. I always felt like, oh, this is not what I should be doing. This is obviously just what I'm doing to, yeah, like it
Like
didn't
fit
feel,
in, or
yeah, like, or like just, it didn't, like, it was like, I know this is what I want to do for myself, but there was, and I'm being supported, but there was this underlining, like, it's not good enough. I'm not good enough, unless I'm doing something bigger or more, or like more in line with, that concrete path that my sister had taken. And so I don't think I actually really thought about it until more like recent years, if I'm being honest. Because I did have moments where I actually moved to Toronto by myself in my 20s, and I owned a hair salon out there. Yeah,
that's cool.
for like, yeah, like I was out there for about 10 years. I think I owned the salon for about half of that time. And that's when I started to like really embrace my queerness, was in Toronto. But so I still had this like notion of feeling a bit shamed through that, but I kind of was just moving through life, like just not really thinking about things, just kind of like doing the things. Of course, owning the salon, my parents were proud of me. I don't know they would have been proud of me even if I didn't own the salon. But I know like other family members, I think, always kind of looked at me like less than, if that makes sense. That nobody said it, and maybe nobody even felt it but me. But just growing up, there was this expectation that career path, those career paths are not the paths that you take. And so I think that there was like internal shame. And I think the first time that I kind of really recognized this life that I felt that I was living for other people was when I finally moved to Toronto, because then I was on my own. As I said, I started embracing my queerness. And that was when I was like, oh, wow, I think I've been living, like denying parts of myself to fit into culture that presented itself to me in a very different way when I was growing up.
Doesn't always have room for, like you said, outside of the sort of binary, even, like when you fill out forms and stuff, everything's centered around heterosexual marriage. And,
Totally.
I go through the same thing when I need things signed, and it's like you always need mom and dad. And it's very heteronormative, marriage centered culture for
Totally.
sure. And I didn't know about that chapter of your life where you embrace some of your queer identity. For me, as a spectator of your life, not to make it sound like a sport of any kind, but as somebody from afar who was just observing you, I'd had the impression that you were really coming out over the last several years. And maybe that's true in a more public space. Would that be correct?
Yeah, definitely. So I have known I've been queer like almost my whole life. When I look back now, I don't think that my first kiss was with my best friend. And I thought that was just how everybody did it. But I didn't actually realize that didn't fully accept. I realized, but didn't fully accept it until I was in Toronto. And even then, there was a lot of deep shame, but I had lots of queer experiences there that opened up my world, kept it very hidden from my family. But then, yes, in the last several years is when I've actually been able to come out in a public way.
Right. And so I think we're going to save that for just a little bit later, because I do want to talk a bit about some of the journey to get there.
Yeah.
Because in the years since I've met you at the doula weekend with Dona, you pioneered an incredible organization, the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Center, and it's become a nationally recognized organization and has supported probably thousands of families, from what I understand, in Calgary and beyond. I would love if you could tell us a little bit about your journey to start an organization like that and to work with pregnancy loss.
Yeah, so it wasn't something I planned. As I guess like you and I both know, that's life, hey? We have plans, and then life actually has different plans. It wasn't planned that I would start this. It was really me experiencing life on my living life. And my partner at the time, my male partner at the time, my husband, and I decided we wanted to try and start a family. And basically, my first pregnancy ended up being an ectopic pregnancy. I didn't even know that I was pregnant. And
can I just get you to explain that for listeners who might not know what an ectopic pregnancy is?
Yeah. An ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy that occurs somewhere outside of the uterus, so typically in the fallopian tube. And so that pregnancy is not a viable pregnancy and actually is a danger to the life of the person who is pregnant, because as that pregnancy grows, obviously there's not enough space in a fallopian tube, so it can burst, and in that process, it can cause life-threatening conditions for the person who's pregnant. And so I didn't know that I was pregnant. And then when I discovered that I was pregnant, I was having symptoms. I was bleeding and like extreme pain. Went into the hospital. They told me that I was pregnant, and I basically in the same breath said that I was likely losing the pregnancy. And so then they transferred me to another hospital where I experienced systemic racism. They sent me back. They didn't believe me. They didn't believe the dates of conception. And they sent me home. And then basically I almost died due to the fallopian tube almost rupturing, and ended up in
Whoa.
the ER a week later on Christmas Eve. And I didn't know what an ectopic pregnancy was at the time at all. And I was working as a social worker in sexual health, and still did not know what an ectopic pregnancy was until I experienced it myself. When you ask the question, like, did you think you were living your life for someone else? I think during this part of my life, now looking back, absolutely. Because I think at that point, that experience was so traumatic, that I probably would have tried to stop conceiving. But I had this idea in my head now that, like, I'm married and we are trying. And so you just try at any cost, basically. So I did. And we got pregnant pretty quickly afterwards. And then that pregnancy also ended in a later term miscarriage that I miscarried naturally at home, which was quite a healing experience for me, actually, because that would be the only like vaginal kind of birth that I would go through. And then got pregnant for the third time, which resulted in my now living almost 13-year-old. He's turning 13 this week. That pregnancy was that was probably the hardest part of my journey. I was incredibly anxious, incredibly disconnected from myself, from my partner, from my life. And everyone just kept looking at me and congratulating me. And I felt so alone. And so when I gave birth by C-section, also then there was a lot of like, oh my goodness, like my body didn't know how to do this. There was just a lot of complications. And then I ended up having severe postpartum anxiety for over a year after I gave birth. And that experience just really changed me, because I felt like, why is nobody talking about this? How come I can't be the only one so deeply impacted by this? And like, I just couldn't understand. And so then when I started sharing my journey, my story with other people, then there was those other folks that were saying like, oh yeah, same here. I had a miscarriage, and yeah, I get it. I was super anxious, or this and that and the other thing. And I started taking all these like kind of certification trainings. I became like a meditation teacher, yoga nidra instructor, a coach, and not knowing what I was going to do with any of it. I just knew that I wanted to support people and not go back into social work in the traditional sense, because I wanted to be home with my kiddo as much as I could as well. And I started a coaching practice, business that was centered around, primarily at the time, was centered around supporting folks who were pregnant after loss. And my business started to grow, and from that, listening to different clients, and I started hosting social events where people could connect who had experienced loss with one another in a social setting, through listening to the one-on-one clients and sitting in those social circles. I just, that idea of the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center came to me, and I felt it with my whole being. And I said, this is a place that needs to exist, and basically took a leap and started it.
That's incredible. You are really an entrepreneur, from what it sounds like, from a hair salon in Toronto to this and many of the other things that I've seen you do. You are absolutely a fearless entrepreneur, it sounds like. And I can also see the thread of, creating experiences and spaces of belonging for others. I would love if you could share a little bit about what the experience was like supporting families through infant and pregnancy loss, and I guess what that chapter of your life really meant to you.
Yeah, that chapter of my life means so much to me. It's really, other than my son, it's the most proud thing that I have put out into this world up until this point. And yeah, when I first started the work in supporting folks going through pregnancy and infant loss through the charity, I was a little bit like I hadn't shared the experience of my ectopic pregnancy and the systemic racism that I experienced in the hospital, because I grew up, as I said, in a very like an immigrant family. I was kind of told, like, yes, of course, racism exists and we get treated differently. But just, put your head down, don't ruffle feathers is kind of the mentality that I grew up in. And so when I started supporting folks through pregnancy and infant loss, a lot of people saw me, a brown woman, as the founder and CEO. And so there was a lot of other folks, other racialized humans that were coming. And the stories that I was hearing were very, very similar. And I started to learn very quickly that my story was not unique, and how that kind of systemic racism or people's identities, whether it's through race or abilities or through sexual orientation or gender identities, how that actually complicates a grief journey. And so I said to my dad, I remember one night saying to my dad, I'm going to make this a part of the space of Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center, where it is for everyone. And specifically, it's for those that feel like their story doesn't fit in into the general kind of parenting and loss spaces that exist today. And my dad was very nervous, and he said, but what if that means that white people will think it's not for them? He actually said that, I remember, at the dinner. Yeah. And I said, those aren't the people that need to find me. The people that need to find me will get it. And so I then became bold, and I started sharing that story, and I started sharing how the space was actually for those stories, like not only for racialized folks, but for those folks who, let's say, have terminated a pregnancy for medical reasons, or for folks who have had an abortion, or for folks that just feel like their story didn't fit, amongst all of those the other folks as well. And so that really became the foundation of the organization. And that foundation been built through all of the work that is and continues to be done there, through like who sits on the board, who makes decisions, whose stories are we uplifting. And that is really what got the organization that kind of national credibility. We really set out to and built kind of this, I don't like the word best practice, but I can't think of another word, where other organizations really started to quickly see that that belonging piece is really key to everything. So for me, this work is so important, because it was my life. It is my life. That it wasn't something that I was doing to be trendy or to be progressive. It was my life story, and I got to build it and put it out into the world and see how needed it actually was, because we grew exponentially, and how much support has come through that organization to others. It's really I'm just so proud of that work.
So rewarding, such a remarkable thing that you have done for so many people across Canada. And, I think about this journey that you've been on, and, it sounds to me that you, at this point that you were developing this organization, were still maybe on a personal level, not quite living your most authentic self yet, even though you were creating this incredible thing that was for others and creating so much, belonging and community for those that are grieving and moving through an incredibly difficult experience. When you look back on that period of your life, do you see like a turning point where some of the other pieces in your life kind of fit into place more?
Yeah, I think so. And yes, I think that as I continued to grow this really, beautiful place of belonging, and people of all sexual orientations and were coming, and I was getting to hear stories and supporting queer families a lot. There was this whisper that continued to come up for me of going, oh yeah, remember remember that you aren't exactly fully straight. And here you are in a very heteronormative presenting straight presenting marriage, because I had a husband, and hadn't really talked about the important piece of why that belonging piece was so important. That aspect was so important to me as well. And so, yeah, there was just like this whispering that kind of continued to come up of like, hey, remember that? And so I think like through the work of seeing families and supporting families that were queer and were experiencing pregnancy loss, it really started to evoke some not questions, but some thoughts for me of going, well, yeah, like life could look different for me as well. Like I'm helping people fully have a space where all of themselves belong here, and yet I'm continuing to like not bringing my full self to it.
Yeah, like deny some parts of yourself. And so along this journey, where do you think was the turning point?
I think the turning point was my ex-husband and I, during COVID, our kind of marriage really fell apart. I think that's pretty true for a lot of folks. COVID
Definitely.
really just, opened a lot of people up in many ways and cleared a lot of relationships, I think. So yeah, I think that there was a like there was for many years, if I'm being honest, in that marriage, there was a whispering of like, you're not happy here. But I continued to push it away because I was like, I cannot deal with that question. Like, no, I'm not. Like, yes, I'm happy. I have a beautiful child. I have this organization I'm really working on. But the organization really found its footing and during COVID. And then at the same time, while that was really building, my marriage was really falling apart for various reasons. And when it unraveled and I finally had the courage, I think it was in 2021, to say to my ex-husband, like, I said it out loud, like, I am not happy here. It was like this defining moment. And I was like, wow, okay. And then we separated. We continued to live together. And I got sober. I stopped drinking and I joined this online group. It was called the Boring Little Girls Club. And it was for, I love the name. It was for women, non-binary and trans folks who were exploring sobriety or were sober. And they had like a tarot card group. And I joined that tarot card group and I got on screen and there was a woman on screen. And right away I was like, oh, I'm attracted to that person. And suddenly I was like, all of this denial of my sexuality suddenly was like, okay, you've left your marriage now, and now you can actually come back to yourself. You don't have to hide it. There's nothing now that is preventing you from being here. You've created this space of belonging where families of all kinds are coming and feeling seen, heard, and supported. You are now leaving a marriage, and you have the permission to exist. And so nothing came out of that, like of that experience of the woman. But what that did do was open me up to finally going, oh, I don't have to hide this piece anymore. I'm an adult. I am a business person who has been saying I'm creating spaces of belonging, and maybe I get to belong too.
I love that. Maybe I get to belong too. Absolutely. And just like circling it back to our earlier conversation with the family piece and the culture and the good little girl, who was born in India, like how did all of that land with your family and what did you have to navigate to really come out authentically to them if you hadn't already?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I didn't really have a coming out moment with them because so over the years I would joke with them and I used to say, if me and my husband ever get divorced, I'm gonna end up with a woman. And everyone and we'd all laugh and everyone kind of just like thought it was funny. And then in COVID, after that experience, I ended up this was like, we were quite locked down and I had elderly parents. And so I was like being very COVID cautious. And so there was a woman who ended up asking me out on a date. And I accepted the date. And then I knew I needed to tell my family that I was going on this date simply because I was like, okay, there's like a COVID risk here and I'm going to tell them. And so I ended up telling them, hey, I'm going on a date. And the person I'm going on a date with is a woman. And they didn't really, there was no like real like reaction to it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, yeah, okay.
They're like, yeah, you always said you would, so okay.
Yeah. So it was kind of like that. And then I remember like I went on the date and then we were having like some family gathering, just like my parents. My sister was visiting from Montreal and my son was here and we were playing like Truth or Dare. And then my son said like truth or dare. And I said truth and in front of everyone. And he said, how many women have you kissed? And then I was
goodness.
like, yeah. And then I was like, I don't know, like maybe 30. And then all of my family like looks over and I was like, yeah, I lived in Toronto and I was a young woman. And they all kind of were like, oh, okay. But there was never like a conversation. So it kind of was like this slow disclosures over time of me being like, yes, this has been a part of me. And now I'm not coming out. And I heard this once in an interview where someone said, when someone comes out, it's not that they're coming out, it's that they're letting you in. And I felt like that was really what happened with my family, because it wasn't this one moment. It was these small disclosures that started to let my family into who I was and have been pretty much my whole life.
I love that, letting them in. That is so beautiful. And I was curious because of your son, being that this generation, I think, is so different from the boomer generation and beyond. I mean, has that been really easy for you integrating your son from obviously your previous marriage into your new relationship and this new expression of you, I guess?
Yeah, well, so my son does identify as gay himself, so that helps.
Definitely.
And I think that helped overall because he has been quite expressive of that since he was younger, and my parents have known that, and it's just been like a part of who he is. And so he was the one who actually told me, like, Mom, you should just come out because, like, Nana and Nanima, that's what he calls my parents, have accepted me and you should just let them accept you. And so I was like, okay. So for me, the queerness, has just been like a part of like who he and I are. And so, when I started to date women, he, was very, very on board. And then with my new partner, he was actually the one. So I didn't think that I was going to introduce him for a little while to her until, there's all of these like rules of life, right? that you think that you should follow and all of the things. So I was like, I'm not going to introduce them until I know that it's serious. But like she and I got serious, like in our feelings and commitment quite quickly because it's a very beautiful relationship I have found. And we're long distance, so she doesn't live here, she lives in BC, but she would like send me flowers and skip the dishes when I was having a hard day, or like letters in the mail, and we would talk. And so my son started to see me being treated really beautifully and me being happy. And so he actually came to me in February. Her and I started talking in October, or like dating officially in October. And in February, he came to me and said, Mom, I would like to meet her because she is making you really happy and like treating you really well. Yeah. So then they met and they have such a beautiful relationship. She's been so good for him. She's very opposite to me. She's very adventurous and like outdoorsy, and I am like a city person and have anxiety, and she's like a free spirit. And so like she's really brought him even out of his shell in many ways. And yeah, he really, really loves her. And I think he really loves seeing me like being really fully me.
And it like makes me think that, you've like, how does it feel to experience love now as like maybe the most authentic and fullest expression of yourself? Is it different?
Oh my gosh, is it ever different? This is like it's the healthiest relationship I've been in because I know my worth. I know, and I'm showing up fully like in who I am. I'm not denying, I'm not living a life for anybody else but me. And even like it's later in life too. And I think that is also a really beautiful thing because we're not trying to build a family. We're coming in as two whole people, just like merging our like fullest selves. And it is like a game changer. I've never experienced respect, like actual deep love like that. I've always been like a very romantic type of person, believed in love, but have never actually didn't think that it was out there in this way. And it's been so beautiful to just be held like exactly for who I am. Like, yeah,
It sounds
it's
like
been
the kind of like coming home.
absolutely, yeah. Like I've said that many times about her that I've realized like home isn't a place. Sometimes it can be a person. And I really feel like our souls have met more than this lifetime. I absolutely feel that way.
Well, I'm very happy for you. That's such a happy story, and we need more happy stories in the world.
I agree.
And yeah, and so some of the more current work that you've been doing after you stepped away from your leadership role, or you might still be working with the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Center in some capacity. Um, is that true? Are you still involved with that organization?
Well, I'm always the founder, and so I'm always like involved in that aspect of being the founder. But no, I've stepped away operationally from the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center, but definitely the team over there carries that foundation for sure.
So tell me a little bit about what has got your attention in life right now.
Well, I am thinking, so I am at this like place, as you said, I'm an entrepreneur. And so I've really been sitting with what's next for me now that I've kind of stepped out of operations from that role. And what's next for me is I continue to be somebody who fully believes in creating spaces of belonging. That's what I do. That's what I've been doing for all of the years. And so I'm in a season of building something new that feels really aligned with everything I've been talking about and working towards. So it's still in its early phases. So I'm going to hold parts of it close, but at its core, it's about curating a space here in Calgary where people can belong, where the entry point might look like a coffee or a book, but what unfolds from there is something much deeper. It's about community, connection, and care. And so I'm building it in a way that feels true to me and kind of taking all of my life experiences and professional experiences and bringing it into what I'm hopeful to open next year.
I cannot wait. Like, you're definitely a person who not just has ideas, but actually acts on them and creates really big things, actually. So that is going to be very exciting to watch unfold.
Thank
What do
you.
you think you're welcome. What do you feel like your younger self would say to the woman that you've become now?
Ooh, that's a big question.
It is.
um, hmm. So many things I would say, and I think probably the primary one is who you are is more than enough. All of you. Like you don't have to shrink. So continue to show up and be brave and bold. And actually that braveness and boldness is what's going to set you apart.
If you were going to tell our listeners, how to know when you're living a life that belongs to you, or, yeah, rather than living a life that belongs to everyone else's expectations, um, how do you know when you're living a life that belongs to you?
Ooh, I think that's such a good question. And I think for me, it is you will feel it. I think we live a lot in our heads and we kind of, at least for me, I live a lot in my head and very much disconnect from my heart, my body space. And every time I'm in a space or doing something that isn't aligned with the truest expression of myself, my body does let me know only if I'm actually paying attention. So like I said earlier, those whisperings in my marriage, if you're not happy here, those whisperings are there. And if we turn towards that, something beautiful can happen. But I think it's really about the whispering and how we feel in our body. We do know our spirit is always telling us, but it's about us being present and conscious enough to actually turn towards it.
Makes perfect sense. I love that. And because like creating safe spaces and belonging has been a thread that's sort of run through everything that you've done, what do you think you could share to a person or a family who's trying to create belonging or safety for a person? Yeah, like maybe some advice or something for people who are struggling with similar things, whether it's personally or with a family member.
I would say pay attention to the person, not what we think is expected, because it's so unique. Life and humans, we're all so unique to what feels affirming for us. I don't even want to say safe, because I don't know that we can ever create spaces that are fully safe, but affirming. What that affirmation looks like for each person looks different. And so I think having conversations with that person about, hey, thanks for sharing with me. And like, what makes you feel the most you? How can I support you in continuing to be the most like authentic expression of who you are? Because even that conversation or that question can lead to that person discovering something maybe that they haven't even looked at for themselves. So I think instead of like reading generic support, like how do we affirm people? Of course, those are helpful, but I think the people, like let's trust the people to know what they need. Not that we're asking them to do the work, but like, hey, it's a simple conversation of like, I love that you have shared this with me and I love seeing you being like your truest self. And I want to continue to create spaces where you're affirmed in that. And what could that look like for you?
Thank you. That's beautiful. What gives you hope, to keep going, like in a world of seemingly so much darkness and heaviness, to be able to face the grief and the vulnerability and the marginalized people and the people who are experiencing systemic barriers, through racism or gender diverse individuals? What gives you hope or what gives you the faith to kind of keep going with all of this?
It is the people, the community. I think that the queer community and like BIPOC communities, racialized communities, cultural, like communities, that gives me hope. The spaces that are between our home and our work, those like social spaces as like the third spaces. Third places as the sociologist calls it,
Hmm.
those give me the hope. It's like the community that shows up, the chosen family, the people that are like living their authentic lives and doing so that other people can as well. I think that gives me hope. And then like really like the queer, like the joy, not just the queer joy, but the joy that comes from living, seeing people live their truest expression. And because in the darkness, I think that joy sometimes gets lost, and it is there, especially in community. There's these really beautiful moments of like just authentic joy. And I think that's what gives me hope.
And what does home mean to you now after all this experience growing up as a queer person of color in conservative Alberta and everything that you've created? Like what does home mean to you today?
It's a good question. I think home today means coming home to me. Like no matter where, if I am being my truest and fullest self and I can feel that in my body and I turn towards those whisperings and honor them instead of denying them, that's when I know I'm home. Like, I think that no matter where I am, that I can be home in myself.
And you are such an example of that. It has been a real honor to speak with you, Aditi, and I'm just so excited about all of the beautiful things that you're creating, both in person and online. And thank you so much for being here and having this conversation with me today.
Thank you. It was such a joyful conversation.
You've been listening to The Long Road Home, a podcast for travelers, storytellers, and culture makers, exploring the roots that shape us and the roads that lead us home. I'm Yamuna. See you on the road.